Just as a reminder, the purpose and goals and the norms are included on the agenda for your review. But as a quick overview and reminder, this is intended to be a group that provides advice and feedback to the superintendent, which I then carry forward to the Board of Education. And a key element of our work together is to seek to understand and make sure that each individual has the ability to voice their perspectives and that we hear those perspectives with the genuine intent to listen and to understand. With that, we'll move into today's topics. Some of them are verbal updates. One of them is a presentation. The first item to go through the four that we'll be talking about today, an update. The first is an update on possible considerations of a future ballot measure. Then we'll be going through an update on our solar projects for Fremont Unified. And then our associate superintendent is also going to be talking to us just about some of the trends that we're seeing as we monitor the revenue returns at the state level. Recalling that we talked about the fact that generally taxes are due April 15th, and we know that income tax and property tax are a huge portion of the state budget. And there was an extension to file those in October. And then in October, we were informed there was going to be another extension. So we're monitoring that and some early information about statutory COLA projections. So remembering also that the statutory COLA as defined by the state is a statistically calculated number that none of us have influence over, that is driven from outcomes of the overall economy. So going back to our first item, an update on the possible consideration of future ballot measures. We talked a little bit in our last meeting about the considerations for a future parcel tax. Again, reminder that our parcel tax expires in June of 2025 and brings in about $4.5 million for the district. And also consideration for a future bond measure. And as a reminder, our current bond measure E was a $650 million bond, of which we have recently sold our last $120 million series of bonds. So good reason to consider future ballot measures in both cases. Where we are in our status to date for a future ballot measure is we have just entered the field, as the researchers like to say, for our second round of polling. This polling is a follow-up to the work that we did towards the middle of the summer. And this polling is actually going to be specific to a parcel tax. The reason why the second polling is specific to a parcel tax is because that is really the next juncture in our journey for considering a ballot measure. So if we were to put a ballot measure for a parcel tax on the March ballot, we would need to make that decision near the beginning of December. And as you may recall, in our initial polling, the bond polled much better for a November election, and the parcel tax was still a little bit below the threshold we'd like to see, but it tested better for March. And so we are looking at updated polling, and the intent behind the polling is to make sure that the board has the most updated information to make a decision about the consideration of a parcel tax measure. That will likely be presented near the first week of December, the results from the second round of polling. And depending on those results, the board may also consider a resolution to put a parcel tax on the ballot. The operational side of how that happens, if you're not familiar, is in order to put something on the ballot, the board has to pass a resolution where they agree to put something on the ballot and they also agree on the ballot language. So this second round of polling that's out now in the field is taking place within our voter community right now. So some of you are members of the community that you know, maybe some of the ones who are contacted by the research group, Godby Research. And in that, they look for a sampling. What is a little bit different about this round of polling is we're polling our parcel tax as it exists now, right, which is a standard amount per parcel across the district. And we are also with a separate sample of possible voters exploring a parcel tax per square foot. So what that means is that people who have a larger parcel would end up paying more than people who have a smaller parcel, because the amount that you pay is dependent on the square foot of your total property. That's being explored because some districts have moved that direction in recent years. And there was recently a court case settled in Alameda County that confirmed the legality of that. And so we are exploring both options, not taking any option off the table, leaving all options open for the board to consider based on how the polling comes back. So as we get that polling completed, know that we will post it publicly for the board's review and the community's review in advance of the meeting. And that's really where we are in the considerations for a future ballot measure. Any questions on this from the group before we move to the next topic on our agenda?
I have a question, CJ.
Mhm.
Do you know which district or which city has practiced the parcel tax by the area measured by the?
Yeah, the most recent one was Alameda Unified.
Okay.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll move to the presentation on the solar projects for Fremont Unified, and I'll turn it over to Associate Superintendent Hillman, who will carry us through this item and the remaining two items on our agenda.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Cameron. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Make sure I can share my screen here. And you guys should see the presentation. I'm seeing a couple of nods. Okay, cool. So this is just a presentation that was prepared by our staff. It's really the same presentation that our full board will see on November 15th. And this is designed as an update to our solar program because it's been about a year since we formalized a contract with a vendor named Forefront Power. And they are in the process of developing the details of solar at the majority of our school sites. And given that this has been an item that's been going on for a long time, we wanted to make sure that the board had an update to see what's going on. So we've separated the schools into phase 1 and phase 2. You can see the list here that phase 1 projects we're expecting to start in late spring through the summer of 2024. And some of these will continue through the summer and into the early fall 2024. Depends upon the school, either school site or building site. You can see the district office and transportation yard are in here too. And so to the extent that we can do any of these projects without disrupting normal operations, whether that's schools and students and staff, or whether it's, buses and just normal traffic, we're going to do that. That's part of the goal of the project team. So these sites will be the phase 1. They should finish, as I said, in fall of 2024. And then phase 2, we've got some of the bigger sites. As you can see, our secondary schools are listed here, and then a couple of others like Fremont Adult Ed. Those will start probably in the spring of 2025, go through the summer, and then finish in fall of 2025. So far, what's taken place is that the solar array placement. So where do we put this thing, on the school site or on the district property? With the phase 1 sites, we have reviewed its placement with all of the staff so that site leaders, site principals, department folks can weigh in, give any sort of details about, hey, move it this way a little bit, or can you think about this over here? So we've gotten through that already. The big real hurdle and the thing that takes the most time is actually interfacing with PG&E. They have what are called interconnection agreements, and these have been entered into. And essentially, the interconnection agreement is where PG&E understands what kind of project we're doing, how big it is, and they go through their engineering to make sure that whatever it is we're planning to do matches their protocols and their design standards. And that sometimes takes a while to get PG&E to respond. So we've been spending the majority of the time doing that. Simultaneously, we've been doing site surveys. In some locations that are in the phase 1, we've already done boring and geotechnical studies. That's already done for the phase 1s. The boring is essentially you get a giant drill out there and you drill into the ground, into the asphalt. You want to make sure that the soils are going to support the weight of the structure. And in some cases in our area, Fremont, Newark, Union City, we have something called liquefaction, where you have essentially watery soils. And so in those cases, you can still have a solar project. You just have to do more with the rack that holds the solar panels. You have to make it stronger. You have to make the footings bigger. And these boring samples tell us just how to design the structures to meet all of the different code requirements. So that work is underway, and that informs the design that Forefront Power is drawing up right now. So the design schedule has been provided by Forefront Power. They're currently working on 30% design development drawings. This is essentially it's more detailed than putting a square, or here's where the solar panels will go on a map. We're getting into actual design development where you're getting construction drawings starting to develop. Also, one of the requirements is putting in applications with the California Geological Survey, CGS. They've been signed by the district. We've submitted those. Another little checkbox we have to do. One of the common questions is about the cost of solar to the district. Some of the interconnection costs are more expensive than others, and it really has to do with the existing electrical equipment that is already installed at our different school sites. So we might have to upgrade certain components of particular schools in order for the new solar system to interface with it correctly. And these costs would be covered by the district. This is not something covered by Forefront Power as part of the PPA or the power purchase agreement. You'll hear me use that term in a few slides here. So as an example, we've already done the interconnection meetings for Irvington, Washington, Mission San Jose High School. There's about $180,000 in each site in expected costs, but we were able to mitigate and avoid for these sites, and it's because we were able to meet with PG&E and go through what our requirements were, go through what their requirements were, and be able to avoid some of the cost, which is good. PG&E interconnection meeting for Centerville is currently being scheduled, and to figure out if we have to do any infrastructure upgrades there. And then obviously we'll do further meetings with PG&E as we can once the designs come together. There's a couple of things we've come across, some upgrades to parking lots. In the past didn't go to DSA, and so there may be some costs that we have to cover in getting some of these parking lots to be compliant with the Division of State Architect, DSA. So at Parkmont, Mission Valley Elementary, Durham, and Gomes, we've got parking lots that were never approved by the state, so we may have to, during the solar process, go and get those approved. And then the project team from RG and Kramer and our director of facilities are reviewing any possible other locations that we could put the solar arrays in case the cost of upgrading the parking lot gets too great. And it depends on the upgrades that the state requires. If you only have to restripe a couple of parking stalls for it to be ADA compliant, that may not be bad. But it could be really, really expensive if you have to redo what's called the path of travel for the entire school site or an entire parking lot. So we'll have to wait and get the comments back from DSA. As it says on the slide, making a parking lot compliant could range from a few $1,000s to $250,000. It just depends on the parking lot. It depends on what's needed. So we'll take these one at a time, and as they come and try to figure out the best, most logical way to get what we want, which is a solar structure in the parking lots without having to redesign and redo the entire parking lot. We'll avoid that if we can. So as far as next steps, the review of the interconnection agreements is the key on our list to get through all the phase 1 sites. We might have to relocate some of the arrays. They wouldn't go on buildings. They might go on a blacktop, for instance, or on a different part of the school. Once we approve the 30% design development drawings for phase 1, they move to the next step, and it's just a more detailed design. And as I said, the tentative construction is the start of 2024 summer. In the spring, there might be a couple sites we can start in the spring, but by summer of 24, they'll all be underway. That's the goal at this point. And that's pretty much it for the presentation. I think that the main other question that we get about solar is, how much money has the district spent so far? The district so far has only spent about $52,000, and most of that's been on consultant fees. All of this is coming from facilities money, in this case, coming from Fund 40. We haven't spent any dollars from Measure E. It's not covered as part of Measure E, so those are separate pots. And then the other item that the board may remember and the community might remember is that when this contract was signed in December of 2022, we mentioned that there would be another opportunity for the board to decide what it wants to do next. We're doing the design right now, but it is possible for the district to continue with the power purchase agreement, which basically means that the solar arrays are owned by Forefront Power, and the district is entering into a lease agreement with Forefront Power. That's what a PPA is, power purchase agreement. We don't own it. They would own it. We're just leasing it. There's another opportunity to revisit that, and if the board wants to purchase the different arrays at the different school sites, it can do so. It has to come up with the cash to do that, and it can borrow the money. It can take out a small loan like we've used in other financial deals in the district. So there's a cut point of making a decision, and it's about 90 days is the limit before we turn the system on. That's when that decision has to be made. So I think for our purposes, we'll bring that to the board for their conversation and public review of that conversation well before that time, probably I'd say mid-spring, early spring. The 90-day timeline, probably we won't hit that until about at earliest mid-May, probably closer to like June 1st or even into July. So we'll lay it all out for the board, and that way they can have a good conversation about what steps they'd like to take. But as of right now, we're pursuing forward with the design, and assuming at this point, if no other decisions made, we're moving forward with a power purchase agreement. And at the school sites that are listed, the district would be leasing that system for the next 20 to 25 years. So that's the solar update. Does anyone have any questions about solar? Yes, Michelle.
Yeah. Couple of questions. One is on the solar. If we are leasing it, does that mean anything that goes down on it, they're going to be the ones coming out and fixing it?
Good question. With the solar agreement, whether we own it or whether we lease it, there is a maintenance agreement that comes along with it. So with the PPA, because we don't own it, yes, Forefront Power services it, makes sure that it's up and running, makes sure that the solar panels get cleaned on a regular basis, because dirty solar panels don't generate as much energy as clean ones. They do like a biannual cleaning. Also, if any of the inverters that collect the power and turn it into DC to AC current, those go out, they replace them as part of the agreement. That's all covered under the PPA. If a district decides to purchase the solar arrays, you have a maintenance agreement that essentially does the same thing, even though the district is the owner of the system. So in either case, this is not something that is maintained by district staff. You kind of outsource that, for lack of a better term. You want basically to have a maintenance contract for the life of the system, because you obviously need it to run in order to avoid getting charged by PG&E for pulling energy from the grid.
Okay. The second question I have is, you've talked about these arrays being in parking lots with some possibly having to go to another area. Have all the schools been contacted as to, is that the optimum thing? Because I can tell you here at Irvington, before we go into a parking lot, I'd like to see it in our pavilion area so that we can use that as cover for kids for lunchtime. And I'm just wondering, have we done that with the schools to see, can we get double usage out of it, basically?
So first question, yes, we have done it with all the schools. We've checked in with them. Where possible and where it makes sense, doubling solar for shade makes sense, but it doesn't work for all types of weather. And so really what the school sites are looking for are additional spaces that are more protected from all types of weather, including the not so hot kind, maybe the wet kind. And so while you're still outside, solar panels aren't going to stop any rain or any sort of wind-driven events. So the challenge with putting solar panels in the middle of the courtyard, for instance, is that would then prevent any future change to the Irvington campus. That's of course assuming you can even get it in there, because the pylons that have to be driven into the courtyard go pretty deep, and we probably have a bunch of things running underneath that courtyard utility wise. And so it might be more challenging and more expensive to put it that close to other buildings. Also, you have to keep a certain limit away or distance away from the buildings. Otherwise, you have to fire sprinkler the entire thing, which adds cost. So typically the reason why parking lots are picked is because they're kind of out of the way for the most part, and they don't they don't cross utility lines, they don't get too close to buildings, and it doesn't prevent any future master planning for a school site. So let's say in a decade we want to tear a building down at Irvington or something, having solar panel in the middle would probably prevent that. And so we want to leave all our options open. And we did do that with all the school sites. So we're thinking about what works not just right now, but what could possibly work down the road. A different set of people come in, design engineers, and they want to redesign a campus. We want to give them and leave them options. So we did do all that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Rocio?
Yes, Mr. Hellman, thank you for the presentation. And I have a couple questions. First, when are you going to present, since I know some people have requests or have asked about this presentation at the school board meeting?
Yes, this is going on this week on November 15th on Wednesday.
Okay. And then my second question is, what is the reason that some of the schools that already started the process, or they already started the work with P&E, what was based in that, and who decided, or what is the reason? Because I'm sure it's also a reason that those high schools and then some schools that already, like Centerville, already start with that. That's my second question.
So the phase one schools are happening first because they are typically an easier build. They're not complicated. If you notice, the phase two schools are almost all the secondary schools that we're going to do are occurring during phase two. And that's because they're more complex systems. They're bigger and it's taking more time to get through the design process. We need more time. And so PG&E is involved with as many of the projects as we're kind of on their timeline is what it boils down to. So we put them all in for review, and then they start taking the ones that are in the phase ones first, and they take them as fast as they can take them, and we come ready to discuss them. So other than separating into phase one and phase two, there isn't really a rhyme or reason as to when PG&E picks up the phone and says, hey, we're ready to talk about GOMS or whatever. It's really up to PG&E's schedule that we're relying upon. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but that's how we separate it.
It's only, but going back to high schools is only because I noticed American and Kennedy, they're out of that, right? I'm not including Robertson, but since I know it's not my business, but it's part of the drama that always Kennedy feels left out. So that's what I was thinking. Well, when are you going to present them? Because I know you guys are already dealing with some drama about Walters, and I'm thinking, oh, that's added something to the pressure. And I know we're trying to launch this ballot, so the future ballot. So I just kind of like consider what happened on 2020, right? So then I just kind of see what is going to be coming, and that's it. And at that time also was a lot of drama with American for different stuff, nothing with the measure, but just general questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. And just to clarify too, both Walters and Kennedy are getting the solar array, and they will come during phase two, so they'll see that in 2025. There's the reason for Kennedy to come later is because we're currently doing a project there right now, and it doesn't make sense to impact them with a solar install at the same time as we're doing this other stuff, because we would be all over the parking lot that we need to be open right now as we do the building construction. So we want to finish one thing, and then we'll do the parking lot piece of it in summer of 25.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Trustee Zhang.
A question on this ADA's requirement of a pass of travel. So the question is, let's say when we do this solar, we would possibly apply for a pass of travel ADA approval, but not ADA, DSA approval. But then let's say we're gonna do a gym or track, then we're gonna apply again. All
So,
these fees, can we combine somehow to save the cost?
Not really. And here's why, is that typically the fees that they charge, it's not a flat fee. It's a percentage based on the value of the project. So even if you were to do the track now and it's $1 million and you come back and do something else down the road, $1 million, it's going to be a percentage of $2 million, not $50 and $50, if that makes sense. So there's some ways you can save in the sense of, if you know in a master plan that you want to do something 5 years from now, and you need to do something now, you plan it in such a way that the architect kind of draws a line on the plan and says, we're going to design up to here and stop and do ADA path of travel upgrades to this location or do what's required by DSA. And then the next design picks up from where that person left off and continues, but you don't have to do the whole school. Often what happens is that if it was up to DSA, they would have us upgrade the entire school every time. And so what we try to do is we try to walk in and say, well, really, do we need to go do this thing over here where it really doesn't connect to the project? Can't we limit this down to the area directly surrounding the project? Because what we're always trying to do is be up to code in the area that we're touching. And so that's the conversation that we have with DSA. But if there's ever opportunities to save money with DSA, believe me, we're looking for it, because we want our money to go to our schools and stay here. We don't want to have to pay a state agency. That's unfortunately one of the things we have to do, but we don't want to spend more than we have to there.
Thank you. Another question is, you said the team is going to present us a presentation of whether we're going to decide to own it or we're going to lease it. So what's the time frame next year? May?
No, it'll have to happen before. The presentation will probably be sometime between February and I would say February, March, April, that time frame. And this is a pretty big decision. So it's one of those things we'll probably bring in small chunks over several weeks, because we want to make sure everyone understands it. I think that right now, the agreement that we have allows for the district to own it or lease it. Right now, we're on the leasing path. If we don't do anything else, it's a lease. And so we just want to make sure that everyone still agrees with that option, given the details we were missing a year ago was about the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you remember that?
Right.
Where we didn't really have the details. We didn't know what the tax credit would be to the district. That's starting to become more clear now. And so we'll have the rest of that information, and we'll be able to put it into a financial model that will show the trustees and the public, well, if we do this project and we own it and we apply for the incentive from the federal government, here's what the cost of the program would be, and this is the ongoing savings to the district. And so with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act details, we have everything we need to complete the picture to be able to fully explain it. Last December, we didn't have it because the bill had just been passed by Congress and signed by the president. So none of the information had been developed. It's taken the last 12 months for the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, to develop the program and to write the rules about how districts would apply for the money.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions on solar? Okay, seeing none, and it's 4:30. I think we're doing okay on time there. So the other item that we wanted to discuss today was just monitoring revenue returns at the state level. So one of the things that we're hearing, and Superintendent Kamek already mentioned this, that the cost of living adjustment that is factored into the state's budget and therefore into school district budgets every year is a formula. It's not something that anyone chooses or selects. It's not a dartboard where you throw the dart and wherever it lands, that's what we get. It is based upon the cost of goods and services in the government sector. And it's measured by something very similar to the Consumer Price Index, but it's a different variable. At any rate, for those of you that you don't care if I get into the weeds or not, I won't bore you with it. But basically, what we're starting to see from the state is they are predicting that the COLA that they thought would occur this year, or for the 2024-25 school year, is going to be something different. And so we wanted to highlight that to all of you tonight, just so that you understood where the state thinks we're headed. Basically, on the School Services of California dartboard, they had predicted, based upon the governor, the legislature, and the legislative analyst's office, a 3.94% COLA for the 24-25 school year, 3.94, which is kind of like a normal COLA. If you go back historically, that's a pretty good COLA for schools, if you think about it. It may not feel that way because we're coming off a year where our COLA was, was it 8.12, I think. That's a crazy COLA, the current year we're in. Never seen anything like that. So a 3.94 feels pretty like, okay, we're returning to normal times. Well, the economic data that's coming in is showing that it's probably not going to be a 3.94. And so what they do is they take 8 different points along time of that index and they average it. And essentially what it's showing it's going to be right now is that if the final 2 quarters stay the same as what we've seen so far, the COLA is going to be 0.53%. 0.53. So that's very different than 3.94. So that changes things, obviously, not in the current year. 23-24 is pretty well set. This is really about what happens in the 24-25 school year, so next year. And so the other factor that needs to be kind of weighed with this, and this is, Superintendent Kamek mentioned this too, it's not just that the economic data coming back is what it's showing, it's also the fact that the state hasn't been able to get their hands on the revenue yet because they pushed the tax filing deadline back. So what it means is normally around this time of the year, November, we have a pretty good idea of what the state collected. They've had months to analyze it, and they are already starting to telegraph ahead of the governor's budget in January and the legislative analyst office update that happens in the fall. They're getting ready to tell us what's going on. The problem is they don't have the money in hand yet, right? It's still just now being collected. And so they haven't had a chance to analyze it. So this will be an interesting year in the sense that the governor will be making a presentation in about 6 weeks. And he will have just had his team, the Department of Finance and others, getting their hands and head around the data that is derived from the revenues. The revenues collected, they'll have just enough time to kind of analyze it, but it'll still be pretty preliminary, only a few weeks in. So it'll be interesting to see what the governor's proposal looks like in January, what they will highlight as their key signature programs for the next budget year. But at this point, a 0.53 COLA is definitely much lower than what we were anticipating. Most school districts are adjusting for first interim. You may remember that first interim is the report that staff gives to the community in the month of December, but it's covering expenditures from the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1, all the way through October. And then it's also our first real look at what the next 2 school years look like. And so it matters. This 0.53 COLA, if that's what's going to be, or even round it up to a nice even 1%, if that's what the COLA is going to be, those are the decisions we basically put into the first interim report in December, so we have an accurate idea of what to look forward to in the future. I think that the experts at the county office, at places like School Services of California, they don't have a distinct, perfect idea of where this is going to land. The only thing we know is that it's not going to be 3.94. It's going to be lower than that. And so staff will do our best to take at this point, because of the delayed tax filing, a best guess, and we'll put a best guess into the first interim report. And we know that we'll have an opportunity to update that again at second interim, which comes in April. So, or more like March. But the point is that we have another opportunity to update our district budget with the more accurate, I would say, accurate projections after the governor's given his update in January. We'll know a little bit more. So at second interim, we should be better positioned to correctly predict what's coming next. This is an interesting first interim. Normally, this is the time we feel pretty confident about where we're headed as a school district for the year. And we're still confident in our expenditures, but we're not really sure what the next 2 years hold because the COLA is really in flux and very different than what we were expecting even just a few months ago when the state adopted the budget in the end of June. So that's kind of the hot off the press information that we were able to get from School Services as well as the County Office of Education a couple weeks ago. I'll be headed to a meeting and conference the next couple of days, which will provide a little bit of access to some experts from the LAO and also from some pretty prominent, well-respected economists in the state that focus on school projections. And so I'll bring that information back and share it with the team. And if we have other things that we can incorporate into first interim, we will. But I think pretty much everyone's agreeing at this point, we won't have a clearer picture until second interim. That's just the way it's going to be this fiscal year because of the delayed tax collection. It really threw kind of a curveball at our fiscal planners. So with all that, I'll stop and see what kind of questions you might have and see if we can answer or take down any of your concerns or questions that if we can't answer today, we can maybe bring an answer back next time we meet. Yes, Trustee Jones.
And I know I'm thinking ahead probably too much, so I apologize for that already. But when I hear something like, you know, a 0.53 COLA, I'm assuming there's no plans then for the state to provide additional money, because I know a couple of years ago we had a COLA in addition to a bump in the base. And I'm assuming we're not going to see any bump in the base. So we're not expecting our expenditures to stay flat. So like I said, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but what's coming to my mind is budget balancing solutions, which is a euphemism for cuts. Is that what we're going to be looking at, or do you think there's any way we avoid that, given what we kind of have, right? Is there any way we can utilize what we have right now to make it through without budget balancing solutions for the next fiscal year?
I think the short answer is maybe. And I think the reason why it's a maybe is because we're not exactly sure what kind of budget balance we need to come to. I think the one advantage that we have at this moment, and most school districts in California have this advantage, is that with that bump that you were speaking of to the base, the state, gave school districts these discretionary block grants and the learning recovery block grant, which provides a little more flexibility than what you would have under a normal circumstance where you're just getting LCFF and a COLA applied to LCFF. So we do have the ability to probably ride out a low COLA year. I think that you highlight two very important things. One is that our expenses are very rarely ever going down on their own. Expenses only go down when you take I don't want to say corrective action, but you take action to make it that way. And so just by the nature of being open and having the organization function, our expenses are going up, because even with a little bit of inflation, that's what will cost a certain dollar this year is this dollar plus one, or this dollar plus two next year. And so I think the size of any sort of, I'll call it an imbalance, of how much money we bring in revenue and how much money we spend, we'll have a good idea at first interim of the current year. That will be the best jumping off point to have a potential conversation about, we call it years 2 and year 3, because every time we do the first interim, it's always the current year is year 1 and then 2 years out. So the 24-25 year and the 25-26 year. I think that the biggest thing we might see just off the cuff would be any sort of positions that we had temporarily funded by one-time monies. Those types of things we would want to make an adjustment to, but those things are already baked into most of our assumptions anyway. We have some positions right now that are one-time funded. We can keep them for a couple of years, but we knew they were going to run out and we'd have to eliminate that position. That was known when we adopted the board approved plans for the Learning Recovery Block Grant, the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant, all those things that are doing kind of limited term programs in our classrooms, that we knew those were going to end at some point. And there might be some that we try to keep and roll into either general funding or LCAP funding or something like that. But we have, I think at this point, without getting super into the weeds of the numbers themselves, we have a pretty good runway that we can get through this year and next year, without having to make any big, kind of like whiplash decisions that'll make everybody say, whoa, what just happened? So I think we're okay, even with the COLA being small. But that's what James and the team are looking at. They are in the weeds right now, looking at everything and making sure that we haven't, missed any T's or dotted any I's or anything like that, given the information we have available. And I think I want to keep saying that because the difference of what we know now in November and what we're going to know in February is going to look very different than a normal year. Normally, we know a lot more in November and people feel more confident in November. The only thing I would say more, and then I'll stop, is we're not alone. There's 1,000 school districts in the state that are in the exact same position we're in, maybe some better, some worse based on other decisions, but they're all dealing with the fact that the November information that's available is not as solid as we'd like. And so we're all having to deal with that. So we're all in it together in that sense. And there will be a lot of sharing of ideas across districts in county, districts out of county, to try to share good ideas on how to weather this until we get better, more firm economic information after the first of the year.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of the major areas where I know we tend to see big increases year over year. With I assume we're going to see similar STRS PERS increases that we've seen in prior years. Our special ed spending is, I'm assuming, likely to increase at the same rate that we've been seeing that increase. I'm concerned with what I'm hearing in the media about utilities costs going way up. And just even financing the normal step and column increases even if there isn't any other increase, that's like almost 1.5% right there. I'm trying to remain calm and realize that I think we're in, like you said, Mr. Hillman, overall, given where we ended last year, we may be able to weather this okay, but I'm starting to feel concerned. I know we have good people on it looking at it, but I was really hoping to hear something a little different today, but here we are.
The other thing that I think is of note, and as Mr. Hillman pointed out, we'll have to see how things develop at the state level. But what the state hasn't done yet, in comparison to where things fell in the crash of 08 and 09, is the state now has a rainy day fund. And they have not tapped into that rainy day fund. So the state in and of itself is much more equipped for a downturn in the economy as it relates to protecting funding for schools. I think we'll have to see what kind of appetite exists in Sacramento to explore any of those options, given what may be, let's just say, a 3% difference in the expected COLA from last year's numbers versus this year's, remembering that statutory COLA number is one that gets set out for statewide agencies, and we all kind of look at it and generally use a similar number across the whole state. So we'll have to see what that appetite is. And remember that, we saw changes last year between the estimate of 6 to 7, and I think it ended at 8.22. So we can keep our fingers crossed that as we go through the governor's budget proposal in January and they get a better handle on their revenue, that maybe things start to look a little bit better. But I appreciate Mr. Hillman's approach and that of the team, and they're really staying tuned to what the county office and the legislative analyst's office are looking at in terms of revenue projections, so that we can be responsive and not necessarily caught by surprise as we go through first interim, second interim. So it is an important data point, and I do think that we're not better off than all other districts, but I think we're in a position where we can be responsive to this need without, I think, too much panic. So we'll definitely be watching what happens at the state level over the next few months. And it's going to be an important few months because January the end of January, middle of January, we get the governor's budget proposal, which certainly sounds like a long way away, but it's really not. It's, 8 weeks away. So there's a lot more information that's going to come forward in the next 10 weeks.
Other questions about this topic?
Yeah, well, good information. I'm just glad that we're not in 3 years contract with the teachers union. So, so that ends this year, right?
Yeah, our
Yes.
compensation agreements with all of our bargaining units was a 3-year agreement with a formula-based settlement. And that concludes right now. We will be sunshining and entering into negotiations with all of our units later this spring. So negotiations will continue, but the signed agreement ends with this year, and we'll enter into bargaining this spring.
Yeah. I think that's where we're doing right, because I would feel very sympathetic with other school district if they entered a multi-years a contract with the teachers union. I mean, I don't know what's their rate, but if they have higher than the COLA, and then that would be a very much negative impact on the school district finance.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that I think there was collaboration and, in my perspective, wisdom from the bargaining units and from our school board and our management team to come up with a formula for the salary increase that was tied to the COLA, because there's, what I would consider for lack of a better term, there's a mutual risk or benefit there, right? If the COLA is higher than we thought, then a greater, not a greater percentage, but then there's more that's provided to the employee groups. And if the COLA is much smaller based on the formula, then less is provided. So that sliding scale of COLA minus a percentage allows an agency to adjust with the funding that we get from the state, as opposed to settling a multi-year contract that is just fixed on projected numbers, right? And so that's where I think there were some good decisions made by all parties, where we came to an agreement with our bargaining units of COLA less a percentage, because that allows it to ebb upward and flow downward depending on what the state provides us with funding. So certainly something to take into account as we move forward. And I don't want to say that it goes without saying, but in looking at our agenda for the next meeting, that would likely be a place where we go through that first interim report, which will have some more detailed information for us that starts to outline some of the impacts of these things as well. So we'll earmark that for our next meeting.
Thank you.
And I think that takes us just about to the end of this meeting. I will open it up next time again for future agenda items, but normally when we go through the first interim report, that takes up the bulk of our meeting. So we'll slate that for our next meeting. And then after our first interim, we'll open the floor back up to other future agenda items that this group would like to see. Are there any other questions or comments before we close and move to the board budget subcommittee meeting? Well, some of us, you don't all have to go. Michelle.
Just quick question. You had mentioned earlier in the meeting that I know we went to an October 15th was the extension on state taxes, but you said there was another extension. What's the deadline on that extension? Because I didn't catch it.
I think it's November 15th. Mr. Hillman or Mr. Akala, any info on that?
I think that's right.
So hopefully that is the drop dead date, that then they'll be able to start formulating what's hasn't been done and what's coming in type thing, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, group. Sorry it wasn't the most exciting news today, but it is where we are, and we will keep tracking it closely and keep this group updated, as well as our board. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks to staff, and we will see you all soon. Have a great rest of your week and have a wonderful fall break.
Okay. Happy
Thank
Diwali,
you.
everyone.